Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is unofficially running for president in 2028. He's currently the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association, and he was recently a guest on Meet the Press, where he shared some of his policy positions and proposals. Richard Nelson here with the Commonwealth Matters, and I'm here with former state auditor and CPC outreach director Mike Harmon, and we're going to talk about an Andy Beshear presidency. Recent policy.
That's scary. That's scary. Don't scare me like that.
Halloween.
It's not Halloween yet. Why are you doing that?
But anyways, so here's the question, Mike, and it's always good to have you on the Matters program where we can process through politics and policy. And so the question is, Andy Beshear comes across as a nice guy, kind, an advocate for the little guy. That's, I think, the perception. He doesn't get real angry when he's at the podium. He's more likely to shed a tear than he is to pound his hand on the podium.
Well, and I think people perceive, and I have not seen anything too distant from it, but, the fact that he seems like a very good husband, seems like a very good father. So for a lot of people, that goes a long way.
It does. It's important to have, if you say you're for family values, to actually treat your family well. But here's the question, Mike. Does Andy Beshear share the kind of values and ideals that Kentuckians have? Are these good ideals, not just for Kentucky, but for the entire country? Now, you've seen some of those clips on Meet the Press, that brief interview that he participated in recently. So we'll start with this. Beshear pointed out the high cost of groceries, high cost of gas prices, homes out of reach for first-time home buyers. And then he said, maybe one of the most significant things he said during the interview was, I believe socialism is a failed experiment. And this was in the context of recent Democratic primaries, where Democratic socialists are winning. So first of all, he talked about all these, high costs here. And then he pivoted over to saying socialism is a failed experience. Why do you think he did that?
Well, I think he said that to try to distinguish himself. And he is correct. There is still some concerns about the affordability. Now, I will say most of that rose during the Biden administration, but obviously with some of the Iran war, some of the stuff that had been corrected, unfortunately, is coming back up, especially in regards to fuel prices. But I think he referred to socialism as failed. Of course, I would agree with him. I think socialism, every time it's tried, has failed. And unfortunately, it cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, definitely millions of lives whenever socialism is tried to the fullest extent. But he's trying to distinguish himself between the other field, but at the same time, he still wants those people who are focused on the affordability, but get it conflated with socialism.
And so here's the follow-up. How can you, and he called himself a pragmatic person during this interview, and I think he's mentioned that before, but how can you say, as a governmental leader, I'm willing to address these things, I want to get involved with these things, and not be for socialism? Because part of the definition of socialism is the government engaging in the economic side of things. And specifically, he talked about the housing crisis, which Kentucky's short. It's over 200,000 homes right now. The average cost for first-time home buyers has skyrocketed in the last 6 or 7 years since COVID. And it's very, very difficult for those first-time home buyers to buy a home. But he said, I'm pragmatic. We need to get in and we need to start doing something right away. He didn't give specifics. But here's the quote where I want us to hone in on is, isn't there a contradiction? Okay, shouldn't you let the free market deal with it? Or does government have a place when it comes to...
I think government has a place from the standpoint of removing some of the regulations that government has already put out. That doesn't mean you can't have any regulation, because you can't just have somebody, take a staple gun and put up a couple of boards and say, here, you got a home. Right. So you do need some regulations, but we have burdened people with permitting processes. We were talking about it to a guy just the other day who does remodels a lot of houses, has rentals. He said over in Lexington, every time he changes out a light socket, he's got to get a permit to change out a light socket. Now that is over-regulation. And the more you do that, the less housing that you will have. You've got to have good, solid regulation, but limited regulation so that people can build. There also has to be incentives. People are not going to build unless they can make some profit off of it. And so you've got to make sure that you take a lot of the government regulations off of it, as well as to help stabilize the market in that regards. But put any type of rent freezes or anything like that, that's not going to stabilize the market. That's going to make it worse because there'll be no incentive to build.
So that's a good point. Ultimately, it is the market. You've
It
got
is.
builders, you've got investors. They're the engine to the housing, to building homes, right? Building development.
Plus, it's supply and demand. If you've got a lot of people that are in a particular area for whatever reason, the more people there are and the fewer homes, the higher the cost goes up. And it's getting difficult for, individuals even to have enough money to rent a home, much less buy a home.
That's right. So on one hand, I think having our leaders mindful and concerned about that,
Right.
that's appropriate and
It
good.
is.
And then to your point about reducing regulation, things that don't make sense. You brought up a conversation that we both had with somebody recently that we know who they were disincentivized from officially hiring an electrician to put in a new light socket that was broken. Right. They've had a workaround. I think they got
so they had to
light
go.
bulbs.
They had to go back and put in all the old
old ones. That's
old
right.
sockets because they didn't have a permit for them. So before they could do anything,
that's right.
They had to put all the old ones back.
So yeah, isn't that interesting?
Crazy is what it is.
Crazy, and I think that's frustrating.
It is
crazy, and then it's frustrating.
Yes, it's very frustrating.
To whether it's the homeowner or in his case, he was a landlord.
Rental property. Yeah.
Mike, we're close to a break, but I'm going to put this question out there and then we'll come back and answer it. But during the Meet the Press interview, Andy Beshear said, "I've been proud to create more jobs than any other governor in our history." That's Kentucky's history. The average wage of a new job in Kentucky this year is over $32 an hour. We're building affordable housing in Western Kentucky and in Eastern Kentucky on top of abandoned coal mines with solar panels on the top, so they're affordable to live in too. People just want to see results. They want to believe that life can get better. And the question is regarding creating more jobs, more than any other governor in our state history. Now, you were part of the legislature. Yeah. You understand the legislature's role in creating the economic climate. You also understand the governor's role. You ran for governor, and I think you articulate when you can and have an understanding of what a governor can do. But when we come back from the break, I want you to answer that question. All right. We'll be back in just a moment.
I'm Mike Harmon, and I've spent 21 years in Kentucky politics. 13 years in the State House, and 8 years as your Kentucky State Auditor, always fighting for you. I've seen firsthand why we need Christians and conservatives engaged in the public square. That's why I joined the Commonwealth Policy Center, because the fight for Kentucky doesn't stop when the legislative session ends. And as America celebrates 250 years, we're launching our 250 for 250 campaign. We're asking 250 families to give $25 a month to help us defend faith, freedom, and sound public policy. 250 families, $25 a month, a stronger Kentucky for generations to come. Please join this fight for Kentucky's future.
Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson, here with Mike Harmon, and we are talking about an Andy Beshear presidency. He has positioned himself to be a moderate, pro-business governor who is in a deeply red state, and he's being looked at across the country as a top contender for presidential candidate in 2028, which will be here before we know it. But Mike, before the break, I shared a quote from Andy Beshear, who was on Meet the Press, and he said that he had created more jobs than any other governor in our history. And many of these are high-paying jobs, average salary being the average pay over $32 an hour. What role does a governor have in that? Is he really responsible for that?
Well, let's first start that say that government, with the exception of government jobs, doesn't create any jobs. Private sector capitalism creates jobs. Now, what the government can do is what we talked about earlier, is they can either make it easier for the private sector to create jobs, or they can make it harder for the private sector to create jobs. Now, what I would say, he's probably had some success in doing that, but most of his success is really not his success. It's the success of the Republican House and the Republican Senate by passing good legislation, most of it of which he vetoed and they overrode, that created a environment for capitalism to succeed in Kentucky.
So let's talk about some specifics. When the legislature first put Kentucky on a path to eliminating the state income tax a number of years ago.
Started at 6, down to 3.5.
Down to 3.5. The very first time that was introduced, Andy Beshear
vetoed it.
He didn't cheer for that bill. He vetoed it.
He vetoed it.
He vetoed it. You're right. But he was pressured by people in his party to say, hey, this is unfairly rewarding those who are in the upper echelon of the socioeconomic strata. And now Republicans did that because they saw this as a growth measure.
Sure.
If Kentucky was more attractive to businesses or people relocating here with lower taxes, that would be an incentive for them to come here.
Right. And there's some other things too. The Republican House, Republican Senate, and to a certain degree when Governor Matt Bevin was in there, they put us on a track to try to get our pensions back in order. We still got some road to go, but our pension systems are in much better shape. And why is that important? Because if the pension system collapsed, then we would be as a pay-as-you-go, which means higher taxes, and businesses do not like to go to states that have higher taxes.
Well, we'd have a higher bond rating.
And we'd have a lower bond rating.
Lower is what I meant.
Yes.
In negative, it'd be a high negative, I guess.
Exactly.
If we were unable to fulfill our obligations to the retirees.
So the Republican House and the Republican Senate, and for the time when Bev was in there, it's going to still take a while to get it to where it needs to be, but it's much healthier than it was, say, 10 years ago.
That's good. So were Republicans up in arms after Andy Beshear said, hey, I'm the governor who's created the most economic development in history?
To a certain degree, but I mean, they haven't made a lot, but there have been statements by leadership that is a little bit funny, given that he's vetoed a lot of the things, whether it's right to work or prevailing wage or whatever, that he's vetoed a lot of those issues that have brought in a lot of those jobs that would have not even looked at Kentucky had not we had legislation that made Kentucky look attractive. And we've still got work to do, but we've come a long way.
Kentucky has seen record growth.
Yes.
A lot of businesses move in, major developments. We saw the largest single economic development announced in Kentucky's history happened just within the last few weeks here.
Yes.
Where the $100 billion data center.
Yes. And they're going to produce their own energy and excess energy to help. Now, Beshear was a little upset that he was not informed that announcement was coming in, so he wasn't able to take credit for that one, but it is what it is. So
it is. That's but the Republicans made a lot of hay over that at Fancy Farm.
Yes,
they kind of made fun of Beshear not knowing about it when he's claiming to be the governor who has brought in the most economic development in history.
And they did it right in Paducah. They did it right. They redid like you said, the gas diffusion plant. A lot of that territory. So it was already developed. It's going to create 8,000 jobs. While they're building it, 600 permanent jobs. So it was just the right way to do it. So
yeah, it was. It
a lot of
seemed
communication.
A lot of communication, but there were things done behind the scenes that made that happen.
Yes.
But to the point of what we're talking about, Andy Beshear wasn't involved.
That is correct.
With that particular development. Beshear went on to say in the Meet the Press, I almost call it Meet the Depressed. I guess that's a derogatory term because it can be depressing talking about politics and the state of our government, state of current affairs. But Beshear said this, that people want us to just fix the darn government. And they just want you to fix the darn government. That's what he told the host. And he did make some propositions that were surprising in that interview, but he talked about outlawing partisan redistricting and enshrining part of the Voter Rights Act. There's 4 or 5 different statements here, but that's the first one. And this is in regards to a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that struck down racial congressional districts. And this is part of the Voter Rights Act, and the contention was that you cannot discriminate based on race when it comes to creating a congressional district.
Well, we did that when we were doing redistricting because of the law. We created well, from not necessarily from congressional, but from the state house, state senate. We looked at majority, what they called majority minority districts, which is what you're talking about.
So you could or could not do that.
You had to do it.
You had to create it.
You had
but
to
that was
create,
before the U.S. Supreme
that
Court
was
ruling.
before the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. Yes.
Okay. So this was a recent ruling.
Yes.
It happened just in the last few months here, sometime this year in 2026. And that was something that Beshear thinks we should go back. Let me pick your brain.
Sure.
Is that part of an American ideal to create a voting district that would be minority, have a majority of a minority member in a state? So in other words, a Black or a Hispanic or whatever identity group. Is that?
I think the hope for this country has always been that we would be, and we had to make some changes over the years, and thankfully our founders put what I would call some Easter eggs to help us find and make changes. But the hope would be that we would become a colorblind society where you're not looking at, what someone looks like. You're just looking at how many voters do you have in an area, what makes the sense to try to keep as many counties, like in Kentucky, whenever we do it, we try to keep as many counties intact without splitting them up. Doing a house and a district redistricting is a little different than congressional, but still you try to keep as many counties intact and divide the fewest number of counties.
I think what you touched on, so stepping back here, the reason why there have been districts, majority minority districts, is for a sense of fairness in representation in Congress. And the thought was that in some states, and there have been periods in our history where there's a deep racism that has pervaded politics, and that's unfortunate. That's part of the
history we live with.
It's the history that we live with, but we've learned from it.
Sure.
But to your point, Mike, about being a colorblind society, that's what we should aspire to.
Exactly.
We should aspire to where we look at, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, not by the color of our skin, but we look to the content of our character. And I think that's something that should transcend any external characteristic, your race or your ethnicity, or even male, female, the sex.
Right.
We look at content, we look at values, we look at character. And those are the things that we aspire to. And I think that's what those who opposed the previous system that we had for creating congressional districts. And this is what Andy Beshear, bringing it into the current conversation, he wants to go back to the way that it was. So that's one of, again, something related to a national issue. It's not really a Kentucky issue so much as it is a national issue. He also said that he wants to create term limits for Congress and for the Supreme Court. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think for Congress, Supreme Court, certainly for the Supreme Court, I think there's some value in having lifetime appointments where the idea, at least hopefully, is they're not worried about politics, because once they're in there, can't be removed, or, it has to be extreme circumstances. If you start putting term limits on them, now term limits on Congress, I can go either way on term limits of Congress. If you're going to do it, then I think you need to have a substantial amount of time that they can be in there. And the only reason I say that is because when I first got elected, I went to a legislative conference, and it was state legislators, and I met some people from Missouri, and they had just passed term limits for their state legislators, not their congressional. And what happened was all their experience left. So it was the bureaucrats that run it. So then it no longer becomes a representative government of the people, because you're never there long enough to understand the system before you leave and the bureaucrats still running it.
Very good. If you are just joining us, you're tuned in to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm here with Mike Harmon, and we're talking about a potential Andy Beshear presidency. He was on Meet the Press recently, and we're unpacking some of his comments on that program. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Here at the Commonwealth Policy Center, we believe that every Kentuckian deserves a voice in Kentucky's capital, not just special interests. But we don't have the deep pockets of the Kentucky lobby. That's why in America's 250th, we're asking 250 families to partner with us monthly at just $25. Your support ensures that you have a voice in Kentucky's capital. Please scan the QR code and join us in the fight for Kentucky's future, or visit our website at commonwealthpolicy.org and donate today. Welcome back to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson, here with Mike Harmon. And Mike, what are your thoughts on a Andy Beshear presidency? Is it going to happen, or is this something where he's just dipping his toe in the water?
I mean, of course, we've in the past, sometimes we see surprises. I think Bill Clinton was a surprise.
Yeah.
I think Jimmy Carter was a surprise. But right now, I think the struggle that Beshear has, he tries to portray himself as a moderate, even though a lot of his policies probably lean more to liberal. But if you're portraying yourself as a moderate nationally, well, then that comes some problems, because it seems like the liberal and the far liberal are, pulling way ahead.
That's right.
So whether or not they can do it now, I don't know. We may talk a little bit about his comment also about the Electoral College in regards to the president.
We'll get that to the moment. But don't you think, to your point, he's appealing to the Democratic voters as a moderate? I think he comes across here in Kentucky to the average political observer as a moderate. However, you and I have a front row seat to what's going on in Frankfurt and to many of the vetoes that he's issued. But I would call him a far left Democrat.
Right.
He's radically pro-abortion. He's radically for the LGBT cause, transgender movement,
child mutilation.
He vetoed a bill that would stop child mutilation of gender dysphoric minors here.
Yeah.
A number of other things. Declared June to be Pride Month. First governor to do that in Kentucky. So you see a number of far left policy positions, and yet he's staked his ground in the middle. Says, I'm a moderate. And he comes across well. He's a good communicator. He comes across as thoughtful and friendly and caring, which are important traits.
Well, they're very important traits. And as we've said, in one of our other things, that, he seems on the surface, and I believe that he is, a good husband, a good father. So when you portray that, your policies do not coincide with how you live your life, it seems.
That's right. So he did stake out some left-leaning positions on Meet the Press recently. Two additional ones to add to this list that we're talking about. He is in favor of overturning the Citizens United ruling,
right,
which said that corporations are kind of like people and they can contribute financially to political action committees. Corporations should have a say in our politics. That's one. The other is direct elections for the president and vice president. He's for abolishing the Electoral College system. Let's go to the first one, the Citizens United ruling.
Well, let's go to the second one first, and we'll come back and visit this. On the Electoral College, I always find that's interesting, because there was a group when I was in the House that would try to do what they call the National Popular Vote, which is using state agreements among the states, a compact, an interstate compact, to say that whoever has the most votes nationally they'll assign their electoral votes regardless of how they vote in the states. But before they trigger it, they've got to have 270 commit. Now, there is maybe some legal concerns whether they could do that, but last I checked, according to their website, they had 244 of the 270 electoral colleges committed. Kentucky's not one of them. And the concerns that I had, Beshear was correct in that Kentucky won't receive a full focus because it's generally already determined. In the past, it was always going to be a Democrat presidential nominee. Lately, it's always going to be a Republican nominee. But the major concern that I had is we can't, as a state, if you just say that it's, the national popular vote, we, as a Kentucky, can't control any fraud that goes on in California. And plus, Kentucky would vote at least 3 hours before the polls close in California. So if California decides to, find some votes, towards the end if they need just enough. We can't do anything about it. Now, what I would suggest, this is not something that I would push for, but if you wanted a true, as close as you can, it wouldn't be perfect, but as close as you can to doing the candidate that has the highest popular vote, but still control that situation where you can control their fraud, then I would suggest having every state, and you'd have to do it by constitutional amendment because they'll never agree on it, have every state do it by congressional district.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get one electoral per congressional district, and then whoever wins the state gets the 2 Senate electorals. That would probably get it as close as possible. But you know, our founders were very wise in setting up this system. That way it didn't allow the bigger states to dominate the smaller states.
So even your proposed change, which you wrote a column, and if anybody wants to check that out, they can go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org to find that. But even with your proposal, if that happened, we'd still have to amend the Constitution.
Still amend the Constitution.
And you talked about the Founding Fathers, Mike. We've got just a few minutes here, but in their wisdom, the Founding Fathers created an electoral college system.
Exactly.
So that every single state would have a voice in electing the president.
Very, very similar to electing the president, but also very similar to how they set up the bicameral situation where you had, you know, every state has 2, so they have the same power in the Senate and in the other, but then the House obviously is represented by population. So that way there is a balance of power, and that wisdom was wonderful.
So right now, as it is, so there's 535 electoral votes. You need 270 to win a presidency. And what Beshear was referring to is that it's just a handful of states that are determining the presidency. But that's just in this political season.
Yeah.
Just in the last 10, 15 years or so, right? It's a fairly small amount of time compared to the overall length of our nation.
But the goal to get Kentucky noticed, it's actually the opposite. If we go to a popular vote, they're going to go to the top 10 populous states, and they're going to put all their focus on that.
All their focus, and what happens when, and this is important for this conversation, then those states that actually tilted the election in the favor of whoever wins, they're going to get the focus. They're going to get the resources. They're going to be paid the most attention to. And this is what our founding fathers did not want to have happen. They wanted every single state to have a voice when it comes to electing the president. And if a president just had to campaign in the largest states like California, Florida, New York, Texas, then it's those states that would have inordinate attention paid to them during the campaign. And inordinate attention paid to them during an administration if that person gets elected. And Kentucky and the other states become irrelevant.
But if you did it the way that I said, and you did it by congressional district, then you would have some presidential electors, Republican electors, be elected in California, and you'd have some Democrat ones elected in Texas, because you'd be doing it by congressional district.
And I wonder, I've not done an analysis, but I'm wondering if that might still favor Republicans. As it is right now, Republicans have a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives and in U.S. Senate.
In the last election, not only did the President Trump win every battleground state, he also won the popular vote. So under the current scenario, probably, but it'll vary, you know, it would vary.
It will vary. I find it interesting that Beshear would go out and endorse the idea of direct elections of the president. We'll see how that plays out, and we'll see if he continues to talk about it. One last thing, Mike, overturning Citizens United. You and I have not talked about this off the record, so I guess we're going to do it live on the air here.
There you go, people.
So you've seen it here first.
Well, what's interesting, after that particular ruling, you know, the Democrats cried foul, but in reality, the Democrats have actually have used that loophole much more than Republicans have used.
And by that, you mean they've created more super PACs and raised more money to help their candidates get elected.
Without limits.
Right. Well, just so Citizens United, again, allows corporations to contribute to PACs or unlimited contributions. They can't coordinate with the campaign or the candidate. But again, a corporation can contribute, and it's unlimited, which was not allowed before. And to your point, Democrats are taking advantage of that more than Republican.
They're both taking advantage of it, but Democrats have taken advantage of it much more than Republicans.
Do you think that that's a winning issue? I guess this would be the last question.
I don't think it's an issue that most citizens are really that worried about. They're worried about, what's the cost of my gasoline? What's the cost of the food that I'm going? That's not an issue that's really important to them. That's more of a policy wonk concern than the citizens.
Last question. I know I brought this up earlier, but is Beshear going to run for president or not?
It will probably depend, I would think, what his polling looks like as he gets closer. Now, obviously, he being the head of the Democrat Governors Association gives him an opportunity to get out and spread his message and raise money into different PACs. I would say he will, but how long he'll stay in, it always depends.
Stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be doing another program on this. Mike Harmon, always good to have you on the program.
Always good to be here.